What if I told you the original web-slinger wasn't a kid from Queens, but a god from West Africa? A hero who existed centuries before the first comic book, a trickster who could talk his way out of any trap, and a rebel who stole the very concept of stories from the heavens. This isn't a superhero fantasy. This is the story of Anansi, and it begins in a world of absolute silence, a world without history, without wisdom, without a single tale to tell. Because every story that ever was or ever would be, was locked away by an all-powerful sky god. One being, a creature of immense cunning and bottomless ambition, decided this could not stand. He would climb to the heavens, confront the supreme deity, and claim the stories for himself. But to do so, he would have to pay an impossible price, a price that would not only change the world, but would also unleash a chaotic, creative, and dangerous power that we are still grappling with today. So the question we have to ask is not just how a tiny spider stole stories from a god, but what else was locked in that box with them. The story of Anansi echoes from the heart of the ancient Ashanti Empire, a powerful kingdom that flourished in what is now modern-day Ghana. This was a civilization built not just on gold and military might, but on the profound power of the spoken word. For the Akan people, history wasn't written in dusty books. It was alive. It was breathed into existence through epic poems, proverbs, and intricate oral traditions passed down through generations. A person's wisdom, their lineage, their very identity, was woven from the threads of the stories they knew and the stories they told. In this world, a story wasn't just entertainment. It was currency. It was knowledge. It was power. And in the beginning, all of that power belonged to one being alone. Nyame the Sky God, the omnipotent, all-seeing ruler of the cosmos. He kept all the stories of the world locked away in a golden box, for his eyes and his ears only. The world below was a quiet, gray place. People lived and died, loved and fought, but they had no way to make sense of it all. They had no myths to explain the rising of the sun, no legends to inspire courage, no fables to teach their children right from wrong. It was a world without context, without a past to learn from or a future to imagine. And into this silent world steps our protagonist. But who or what is Anansi? To call him just a spider is to miss the point entirely. Anansi is a liminal being, a creature who walks the razor's edge between worlds. He is sometimes a spider, small and easily overlooked. Other times he is a man with a family, a home, and very human desires. And at all times he is a spirit, a minor god with a direct line to the great powers of the universe. He is the ultimate underdog. He possesses no great strength, no terrifying claws, no divine thunderbolts. His only weapon is his mind. His wit is a razor, his tongue is a key, and his schemes are intricate webs designed to trap creatures 1,000 times his size. He is the living embodiment of the idea that intelligence will always triumph over brute force. This makes him a trickster god, a common and critical archetype in mythologies across the globe. From Loki in Norse sagas to Coyote in Native American traditions, the trickster is the agent of chaos and change. They are not purely good, nor are they purely evil. They are the cosmic disruptors, the ones who break the rules, challenge authority, and in doing so push the world forward. Anansi is the quintessential trickster. He is greedy, lazy, and vain. He will cheat his own family for a slightly better meal. But he is also creative, courageous, and endlessly charming. He is the one who sees the suffocating order of the universe and has the audacity to poke a hole in it, just to see what happens. And he looked up at the silent sky, at the kingdom of the god who hoarded all the light and color of knowledge, and he decided he wanted it. The problem was monumental, almost absurd in its scale. Nyame the Sky God was not just a king. He was the source of all things. His power was absolute. He lived in a palace beyond the clouds, surrounded by celestial servants, far removed from the struggles of the world below. Why did he keep the stories to himself? Perhaps he believed mortals were unworthy. Perhaps he saw stories as a dangerous, chaotic force that needed to be contained. Or perhaps, like any great power, he simply did not wish to share. To the people on the ground, the reason didn't matter. The result was the same: a life of ignorance. They were adrift in a sea of unexplained phenomena. They didn't know why the moon waxed and waned, why the seasons changed, or why there was suffering and death. They had no heroes to emulate, no villains to despise. They were a people without a narrative, and a people without a narrative have no identity. This was the great injustice Anansi saw. He felt the silence not as peace but as a prison. He knew that without stories, humanity could never grow, never learn, never truly become self-aware. He looked at his children, his village, and the world around him, and he felt a deep, gnawing hunger for something more. And so, the smallest of creatures formulated the grandest of plans. He would do what no one else dared. He would travel to the Sky Kingdom. He would stand before the throne of the Almighty, and he would bargain for the golden box of stories. The very idea was laughable. It was a gnat challenging a hurricane. But Anansi was undeterred. He began to spin. Not a web of silk to catch flies, but a web of thought, a plan so intricate and so audacious it might just work. He spun a single shimmering thread of silk, stronger than any rope, and cast it upwards higher and higher, until it caught on the edge of a cloud, on the very doorstep of Nyame's domain. And then he began to climb. Hand over hand, leg over leg, he ascended, leaving the silent earth far below. He climbed through winds that threatened to tear him from his thread, past stars that watched him with cold indifference. The journey was long and arduous, a testament to his unbreakable will. Finally, he pulled himself over the edge and stood in the celestial court of the Sky God. The air hummed with power. Spirits of light and air parted before him, whispering in shock and amusement. Who was this tiny creature, this Spider-Man, who dared trespass in this sacred place? Anansi ignored them, his 8 eyes fixed on the immense, shining figure on the throne. He walked to the foot of the dais, bowed low, and made his request, his voice small but clear in the cavernous hall. He, Anansi, wished to buy the stories of the world. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the kingdom. It was the sound of Nyame the Sky God laughing. The laughter was not cruel, but filled with a kind of cosmic pity. He looked down at the minuscule Spider-Man standing before him, and was amused by his sheer nerve. Who was this speck to demand the greatest treasure in all of creation? But Nyame was also a god of order and rules. He would not simply smite the intruder. He would play a game. He would set a price so impossibly high, so utterly unattainable, that it would serve to teach this upstart a lesson in humility and send him back to the silent world in disgrace forever. Nyame leaned forward, his voice like the rolling of thunder. He would gladly sell the stories to Anansi, but first Anansi had to bring him 4 things. He must capture Maboro, the hornet swarm that stings like fire. He must capture Onini, the great python that can crush an elephant in his coils. He must capture Osibo, the silent leopard with teeth like daggers. And finally, he must capture Moesha, the elusive fairy folk who are never seen by mortal eyes. Bring these 4 impossible creatures to the Sky Kingdom, and the stories would be his. The court erupted in laughter. The task was designed for failure. It was a death sentence wrapped in a riddle. But as the echoes of laughter filled the hall, Nyame looked down and saw something he did not expect. Anansi was not trembling in fear. He was not weeping in despair. He simply bowed his head, and on his face, the Sky God saw the faintest hint of a smile. A smile, not of arrogance, not of defiance, but of something far more dangerous. Knowledge. It was the smile of a weaver who sees the finished pattern before a single thread is thrown. The Sky God Nyame, for the first time in an age, felt a flicker of uncertainty. He leaned forward on his golden stool, his voice losing its booming theatrical quality, becoming something sharper, more focused. You find your doom amusing, Spider? Anansi's voice, though small, carried through the now silent hall. Oh no, great Nyame. I am merely honored by the scale of the challenge. You ask for the impossible, which proves you believe I am capable of achieving it. A few of the spirits and lesser gods shifted uncomfortably. The spider's words were like a finely woven net, turning the Sky God's mockery back on itself. Nyame's eyes narrowed. He would not be played by this 8-legged jester. Very well, Nyame declared, his voice once again a thunderclap that shook the clouds. Your flattery is as thin as your webs. Here is your first task. Go and bring me Maboro the hornet swarm. Not one, not a dozen, but the entire swarm, alive and stinging, sealed within a single gourd. Do this and you may return. Fail, and the winds themselves will forget your name. The hall erupted again, but this time the laughter was laced with a cruel certainty. Maboro. The hornets were living fire, a cloud of daggers with a collective mind of pure rage. Their sting was set to bring a madness of burning pain. Armies of men had been scattered by them. Mighty beasts fled from the sound of their buzzing. And Nyame was asking this tiny creature to bottle them up like palm wine. It wasn't a task, it was a poetic death sentence. Anansi simply bowed again, a gesture of profound respect that masked the frantic spinning of the gears in his mind. He turned and walked away from the golden stool, away from the shimmering court, his tiny legs carrying him out of the clouds and back down to the world of dirt and trees and cunning. He didn't go home. Not at first. Instead, he went to the great baobab tree where he knew Maboro had made their nest. He didn't get close, not yet. He sat at a distance, hidden in the tall grass, and he watched. He watched the sun beat down on the papery gray fortress. He watched the guards, iridescent and menacing, circling the entrance. He saw the sheer, overwhelming number of them, a living, breathing storm of venom and fury. Brute force was impossible. A direct attack was suicide. He needed a different kind of weapon. He needed a story. Finally, Anansi returned to his small hut. His wife, the wise and patient Aso, was waiting for him. She saw the look on his face, a mixture of terror and exhilarating focus. Before she could ask, he spoke. "Aso, my love, I need a calabash gourd, the largest one we have. And I need a big leaf from the banana tree." Aso, who knew her husband better than he knew himself, simply nodded. She didn't ask why he needed to capture a hornet swarm for the sky god. She didn't ask if he was insane. She understood that in Anansi's world, the line between insanity and genius was a thread he danced upon daily. She brought him the gourd and the leaf. Anansi took them and went to the river. He filled the gourd with water, sloshing it around. Then he emptied it, leaving only the dampness inside. He held the banana leaf over his head like an umbrella, and then he began his slow, deliberate walk back towards the baobab tree. As he approached, the low, ambient hum of the swarm grew into an angry roar. The guards flew out to meet him, a vanguard of tiny winged warriors. "Go back, Anansi," they buzzed, their voices 1,000 tiny razors. "This is the domain of Maboro. We will give you 1,000 deaths if you take one more step." Anansi stopped. He looked up at the sky, which was a perfect, cloudless blue. He squinted his eyes. "Oh dear," he said, his voice loud enough for the hornets to hear. "It looks like it's going to rain." The hornets scoffed. The air was dry and hot. There wasn't a hint of a storm. "You are a fool, Anansi. Your eyes are as weak as your body." Anansi ignored them. He began a strange, one-sided argument with himself. "My wife Aso, she is so smart," he said loudly, shaking his head. "She told me, 'Anansi, don't go near the hornets. They are fearsome, yes, but they are not very clever. The moment it rains, they will be scattered and lost, their wings too wet to fly.'" The buzzing from the nest grew louder, more agitated. Anansi continued his monologue. "But I told her, 'No, my dear Aso, you are wrong about this one thing. The hornets of Maboro are the wisest of all creatures. I am certain they have a plan for the rain. They would never be so foolish as to be caught in a downpour.'" He paused, looking from the hornets to the sky. "But now I see this big storm coming, and I begin to wonder, maybe she was right. Maybe you are all just fools." That was the word, the spark on the dry tinder of their pride. Fools. The entire swarm seemed to vibrate with indignation. How dare this spindly-legged arachnid question their intelligence? And then Anansi made his move. He took the gourd full of water and, with a great heave, flung the contents high into the air, directly over their nest. The water broke into 1,000 droplets, coming down like a sudden, intense burst of rain. "The storm!" Anansi shouted, holding the banana leaf over his own head. "It's here! Oh, you poor, foolish hornets! Your wings will be soaked. You'll be scattered to the winds, just as Aso said." Panic erupted. The hornets, feeling the water on their delicate wings, believed him completely. Their collective rage turned to collective fear. They flew in chaotic circles, their angry buzzing turning to cries of alarm. They needed shelter, and they needed it now. Anansi, seeing their confusion, held up the empty, hollow gourd. "Quickly!" he yelled over the chaos he had created. "In here! Come into my dry gourd. You can shelter here until the storm passes. Hurry, before you are all lost." It was a perfect trap, baited not with honey, but with their own pride and fear. To the terrified and disoriented hornets, The dark, dry opening of the calabash gourd looked like the finest sanctuary in the world. They didn't hesitate. The leader dove in, and the rest followed, a torrent of black and yellow bodies pouring into the narrow opening. They streamed in, desperate to escape the rain, eager to prove Anansi's wife wrong, to show that they did in fact have a plan. Anansi waited, his heart pounding a rhythm against his ribs. He watched as the last of the stragglers buzzed its way inside. The air, once filled with a deafening roar, was suddenly eerily quiet. With a speed no one would think his lanky legs possessed, he snatched a wad of thick clay he'd prepared from the riverbank and slapped it over the opening of the gourd, sealing it tight. He held it up to his ear. Inside, he could hear the sound of a captured thunderstorm, the furious, muffled buzzing of thousands of hornets. Realizing too late that the sky was still blue, they had not been saved from a storm, they had been captured by a story. The journey back to the Sky God's court was the longest of Anansi's life. He carried the gourd, which vibrated with contained rage, on his back. Every step was a testament to his audacity. Anansi had done it. He had bottled a storm. He had captured Maboro. When he appeared again before the golden stool of Nyame, the court fell silent. Not with mockery this time, but with a stunned, disbelieving awe. Anansi walked forward, the buzzing gourd a stark, earthy object in the ethereal perfection of the sky realm. He placed it on the floor before the sky god. Nyame stared at the calabash. He could hear the rage within it. He could feel the vibration through the clouds at his feet. "It is a trick," one of the lesser gods whispered. "There is nothing inside but buzzing beetles." Nyame raised a hand for silence. He looked at Anansi, whose face was completely unreadable. Slowly, the sky god gestured, and one of his attendants cautiously approached the gourd. With trembling hands, the attendant pulled away the clay plug. For a single, heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the entire swarm of Maboro, a furious living cloud of death, erupted from the opening. But they did not scatter. Nyame, with a flick of his wrist, created an invisible barrier of force around them, containing them in a swirling, buzzing sphere of pure anger right in the center of the hall. The court gasped. It was them. All of them. The legends were true. Anansi had done the impossible. The laughter was gone. The scorn had vanished. In its place was a heavy, unnerving silence. Nyame looked from the contained swarm to the tiny spider standing before him. The faint smile was back on Anansi's face. The sky god made the invisible prison shrink, forcing the hornets back into the gourd, and his attendant quickly resealed it. Nyame leaned back on his stool, his expression unreadable. He had set an impossible task and it had been met. The game had changed. "You have been clever, Spider." Nyame's voice was low, stripped of its earlier bombast. "But cleverness is a firefly. It flashes brightly but is quickly gone." The hornets were driven by pride and fear. "Your next task will not be so easily swayed." He pointed a long golden finger at Anansi. "Now you will go back to the world of green things. And you will bring me Onini, the great python, who can swallow a buffalo whole. Bring him to me alive." Anansi tumbled back down the silver thread. The world of gold and clouds receding above him, the scent of green things and wet earth rising to meet him. Onini, the great python. The task echoed in his mind, a heavy stone in the pit of his stomach. This was not like the hornets. You couldn't trap a creature like Onini with a gourd and a little bit of water. Onini was ancient, powerful. His scales were like shields of polished obsidian, his eyes were chips of yellow diamond, and his hunger was the stuff of legend. Hunters would tell stories around their fires of how the great python would unhinge its jaw, and the world would simply disappear down its throat. A goat, a warrior, a buffalo. It made no difference to Onini. And Nyame, the sky god, wanted him brought in alive. Not just defeated, not just outsmarted, but captured, bound, and delivered. Anansi landed softly on a broad leaf, the 8 points of his feet barely making a whisper. He scurried home, his mind a whirlwind of impossible schemes and discarded plans. He couldn't fight the python. He couldn't poison it. He couldn't intimidate it. What weapon did a small spider have against a creature that was practically a living, breathing river of muscle and death? He reached his tidy home, woven into the crook of a baobab tree, and found his wife, the wise and patient Oso, grinding millet. She looked up, her gaze immediately seeing past his cheerful facade to the worry churning within. "The Sky God has given you another task," she said. It wasn't a question. Anansi sighed, a long weary sound. "He has. And this one, my dear Aso, this one feels different. He wants me to bring him Onini, the great python." Aso stopped her grinding. The rhythmic crunch of stone on grain fell silent. The jungle around them suddenly seemed too quiet. She looked at her husband, this creature of clever thoughts and quick words, and saw the flicker of genuine fear. "Onini," she repeated, her voice low. "The one who leaves trails as wide as a fallen tree." "The very same," Anansi confirmed, pacing back and forth on a low branch. "How, Aso? How can I possibly do it? My silk is strong but not that strong. My venom is potent but his hide is like stone. If I get close enough to speak, he could swallow me without even noticing." Aso watched him pace, her mind working not on the problem of the python's strength, but on the problem of the python's mind. She knew, as all wise partners do, the true nature of her husband's opponent. "What is the proudest creature in all the jungle, Anansi?" she asked softly. Anansi stopped. "Well, the lion perhaps. Or the elephant." "The lion is proud of his roar," Aso corrected gently. "The elephant is proud of his memory. But what is Onini proud of?" Anansi thought for a moment. He pictured the great python, not hunting but resting, coiled in the sun. He pictured it moving through the undergrowth, a seamless, endless flow of power. "His size," Anansi whispered, a spark igniting in his eyes. "His length. He believes himself to be the longest, strongest thing in the world." Aso smiled. "And what does a proud man do when you tell him he is not as great as he thinks?" The spark in Anansi's eyes became a wildfire. A grin spread across his face, a familiar, cunning expression that Aso knew well. The fear was gone, replaced by the thrill of a truly magnificent idea. "He will do anything to prove you wrong," Anansi finished. He rushed to his wife and kissed her cheek. "Aso, my love, you have untangled the knot in my mind. I know what I must do." He didn't waste a moment. He went to the edge of the forest where the palm trees grew straight and tall, their fronds reaching for the sun. He searched until he found a branch that had fallen in a recent storm. It was long, thick, and perfectly straight. With immense effort, he began to drag it back towards his home. Then he went deep into the jungle, to where the creeper vines grew thick as a man's wrist, the kind of vines that monkeys use for swinging and men used for rope. He gathered a huge bundle of them, tying them into coils and slinging them over his back. With the long palm branch in tow and the heavy vines on his back, Anansi set off toward the part of the jungle where the air grew still and the shadows were deep. This was Onini's territory. The other animals knew not to linger here. The birds were silent, the monkeys were absent. The only sound was the hum of insects and the slithering of Anansi's own thoughts. He walked through the jungle, not trying to be quiet, but instead making a bit of a show. He was talking to himself, his voice loud and argumentative. "She is wrong, I tell you. Completely wrong. Oh, he is long, I grant you that. Very long. But longer than the palm branch? Impossible. It cannot be done." He would pause, as if listening to an invisible companion, and then start again. "What do you mean? Of course he is. Have you seen the length of this branch? It is the father of all branches. No snake, no python, no creature that slithers could ever hope to match its length. I tell you, my wife is mistaken." He continued this one-sided debate until he reached a clearing, where a massive rock, warmed by the sun, served as the python's favorite resting place. And there he was, Onini. He was even larger than the legends claimed. His coils were a mountain of muscle and shadow, shimmering with a faint, oily light. His head, as large as a grown man's chest, rested upon his own body, the yellow eyes half closed in a lazy, arrogant slumber. The sound of Anansi's voice stirred him. One eye slit open, a sliver of ancient gold, and fixed upon the tiny spider dragging his branch in his vines. "Who is it that makes so much noise in my kingdom?" The voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep underground. Anansi feigned surprise, dropping the palm branch with a clatter. "Oh, great Onini, forgive me. I did not see you there. I was lost in thought. A silly argument with my wife, you see." The python's head lifted a few inches from his coils. He was not yet angry, merely curious. A spider arguing with his wife was a minor and potentially amusing distraction. An argument? Onini rumbled. About what could a creature like you possibly have to argue about with such passion? It is about you actually, mighty Onini, Anansi said, bowing as low as a spider could. My wife also, she insists that you are the longest creature in all the world. She claims that you are even longer than this palm branch I have found. Anansi gestured to the branch on the ground. Onini's gaze shifted to it, then back to Anansi. And you? The python hissed, a hint of steel in his voice. What do you say, little spider? Anansi shuffled his feet nervously. Well, great one, I took the other side of the argument. I told her that while you are impressively, magnificently, unbelievably long, that to be longer than this specific branch, well, I said it was an exaggeration. The air grew cold. Onini slowly, deliberately began to uncoil. It was a terrifying sight. The mountain of scales became a river, flowing out across the clearing, an endless expanse of power. He was far, far longer than Anansi had even imagined. An exaggeration? Onini hissed, his huge head now level with Anansi, his forked tongue tasting the air. A loving one. Anansi added quickly. She only meant to praise you. But I am a creature of facts, and I foolishly bet her that you would fall short. Please do not be angry. It was a foolish domestic squabble. But it was too late. The hook of pride had been set. Onini looked at the spider, then at the branch, his yellow eyes burning with indignation. Your wife is wise. You are a fool, the python declared. I will not have my greatness questioned because of your ignorance. I will prove it to you. Lay me against this branch, and you will see what true length looks like. Anansi could have danced with joy, but he kept his composure, feigning reluctance. Oh, great Onini, I couldn't ask you to. It is too much trouble. It is no trouble. Onini boomed. Do it now. So you can go home and tell your wife that you have looked upon the greatest of all things and admit that you were wrong. So Anansi directed the great python. If you would just lie straight, yes, right alongside the branch. Perfect. Onini stretched himself out, his body a magnificent straight line of black scales. He was indeed longer than the palm branch by at least a tail's length. Now, Anansi said, picking up one of the thick creeper vines. To make sure the measurement is accurate, I must tie your tail to the end of the branch. So you don't slip, you see. Blinded by his own vanity, Onini agreed. Yes, yes, be quick about it. Anansi wrapped the vine around the python's tail, pulling the knot tight. Very tight. Now, Anansi said, scurrying up to the python's head. I must do the same here. It's only fair. To keep you from stretching and cheating, you understand. I do not cheat. Onini roared, but he allowed it. Anansi tied the vine just behind the python's massive head, cinching it with all his might. The python was now fixed at both ends. There's a bit of a sag in your middle, mighty Onini, Anansi chirped, moving to the python's center. It will spoil the measurement. I must tie you here as well, and here just to make sure you are perfectly straight. With each lie, Anansi added another vine, pulling it tighter and tighter, wrapping it around and around the python and the palm branch. Onini, still focused on proving his length, barely noticed as his freedom was being bound away, vine by vine. Finally, when the last vine was tied, Onini lay perfectly straight and completely immobilized. He was a prisoner lashed to the wood. He tried to move. He could not. He tried to coil, to strike, to slither away. The vines held him fast. Panic began to replace his pride. Spider! What is this? The measurement is done. Untie me at once. Anansi climbed atop the python's head, looking down into the furious, helpless yellow eye. His voice, once full of fake humility, was now dripping with triumph. Onini, he said coolly, my wife and I were not arguing about your length. We were arguing about your wisdom. She said you were wise. I said you were a fool. He leaned in close. It seems that for once, I have won an argument with my wife. Anansi turned his back on the struggling, roaring python. He grabbed the end of the palm branch, and with a strength born of pure, unadulterated cleverness, he began to drag his second impossible payment back toward the silver thread that led to the sky. Heaving, straining, every one of his 8 legs burning with a fire he had never known. The jungle floor, usually a familiar tapestry of scents and textures, was now just an obstacle course of pain. Roots snagged, stones grated, and the sheer, dead weight of the python Onini was a constant, monstrous anchor. But Anansi pulled. He pulled with the memory of his children's faces, with the burning desire to see his name, his stories woven into the fabric of the world. He pulled until the base of the great silver thread was before him, shimmering like a promise. Securing the python to the web was a feat of engineering that would have baffled the greatest builders. He wove and tied, anchored and reinforced, sweat beading on his brow. Then the ascent. It was no longer the graceful, effortless climb of a spider. This was the grueling inch-by-inch haul of a dockworker pulling a ship to shore. The web groaned. It stretched, thinning to the point of transparency, but it held. It was his web, after all, spun from the very essence of his being. It would not fail him. Hours or perhaps days later, he breached the cloudy floor of the Sky Kingdom. He collapsed, his legs trembling, his body a single throbbing ache. Behind him, lashed to the palm branch, lay the colossal, unconscious form of Onini the python, the terror of the forest, delivered like a parcel. The court of Nyame the Sky God fell silent. The spirits, the lesser gods, the attendants, all stared. Their eternal celestial boredom was shattered by the impossible sight. A spider, no bigger than a man's thumb, had dragged a river monster into their pristine domain. Nyame himself rose from his golden stool. He descended the steps, his face not of anger, but of pure, unadulterated shock. He circled the python, his eyes wide. He poked the thick, scaled flesh with the end of his ceremonial staff. It was real. The whispers started, a ripple of disbelief turning into a wave of awe. Nyame turned his gaze to the exhausted spider. There was a new light in the sky god's eyes. Not respect, not yet. But the casual dismissal was gone, replaced by a flicker of caution. "You have done it, Anansi," Nyame's voice boomed, though it lacked its usual condescending tone. "You have brought me Onini, a single impossible thing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But the price for the stories is not one impossible thing. It is 3. He pointed a long shimmering finger back toward the world below. "Now you must bring me the Maboro, the hornets." A gasp went through the court. This was different. Onini was a creature of brute force, a physical challenge. The Maboro hornets were a force of nature. They were a living, breathing, stinging cloud of death. Their swarm could strip a beast to the bone in minutes. They were fury incarnate, 1,000 tiny spears with wings, and they answered to no one. To capture one was madness. To capture the entire swarm, that wasn't impossible. It was unthinkable. Anansi, still catching his breath, simply nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He just turned, lowered himself back down his silver thread, and let the clouds swallow him once more, leaving the Sky Kingdom to buzz with the news of his absurd quest. Back in the forest, he didn't immediately set a trap. He knew that the hornets' greatest strength, their collective, unified anger, was also their greatest weakness. They thought as one, they attacked as one. Their pride was as sharp as their stingers. To catch them, he needed a vessel. He found a large, hollowed-out gourd, its inside smooth and dark. He then went to a nearby stream and filled it halfway with water before returning to his home to fetch a few large banana leaves. His wife also watched him, her eyes full of worry. "Anansi," she said, her voice soft. "The python was one thing, but the hornets, they have no reason. You cannot bargain with the storm." Anansi just smiled, a thin, knowing smile. He put a finger to his lips. "My dear Aso," he whispered, "you are right. You cannot bargain with the storm, but you can convince the storm it wants to be in a bottle." He then explained his plan, and Aso, ever his partner in cleverness, understood her role perfectly. Anansi took the gourd and the leaves and made his way toward the great silk cotton tree where the Maboro made their home. Their nest was a masterpiece of natural architecture, a gray, papery fortress pulsating with a low, menacing hum. The air itself thrummed with their power. Anansi didn't approach the tree. He stopped a short distance away, in a small clearing, and began his performance. He held up the gourd, then shook his head in mock disgust. He put it down, picked it up and shouted, "It's clearly not big enough. They'll never all fit." He then began to argue loudly with himself. Aso, hidden nearby, played her part. "What are you talking about, Anansi?" He'd yell in a high-pitched, mocking imitation of his wife's voice. "Of course they'll fit. They are small things. Then in his own voice he'd retort, "Small? Ah, so you are a fool. Have you seen the swarm? They are a legion. They are a sky-darkening plague. This gourd is an insult to their numbers. I say they can't all fit inside." "They can," he squeaked back in Aso's voice. "They cannot," he boomed. The low hum from the hornet's nest grew louder. The frequency changed. It was shifting from a baseline hum of activity to a higher-pitched buzz of irritation. A few scout hornets flew out, circling the strange spider who seemed to be having a very public, very loud marital dispute. Anansi ignored them, escalating the argument. "I bet you my share of the evening meal that the entire Maboro swarm cannot fit inside this gourd," he shouted at the empty air. "And I bet you mine that they can," he answered himself. "They are great, but they are not that great." This was the final insult, the challenge to their greatness, the suggestion that they were somehow limited. The hum became a roar. The entrance to the nest vomited a black swirling cloud of rage. It was the storm unleashed. The Maboro poured into the sky, their collective anger focused on the tiny, arguing spider. But Anansi didn't run. He stood his ground, held up the gourd, and shouted at the approaching cloud of death. "See, I told you. You are too many. You are too mighty. You could never all fit inside this pathetic little gourd. It is impossible." He then took one of the large banana leaves and held it over his head like an umbrella. "And what's more," he yelled over the deafening buzz, "I hear the rains are coming. A great storm. It's a shame you'll all be caught out in it. If only you had a dry, safe place to shelter, but alas, this gourd is much, much too small for a nation as grand as yours." The hornets, blinded by pride and fury, heard only the challenges. Asterisk too small. Cannot fit. Not that great. Asterisk they saw the open gourd. They heard the taunt about the coming rain. The leader of the swarm, driven by an instinct to prove the spider wrong on every count, dove straight for the opening of the gourd. And where the leader went, the swarm followed. It was a cascade, a waterfall of black and yellow bodies pouring into the small opening. They pushed and shoved, determined to prove their sheer numbers by cramming themselves into the container. The sound was incredible, a contained explosion of a million buzzing wings. Anansi held the gourd steady, his heart pounding in his chest, a manic grin spreading across his face. When the last hornet had squeezed its way inside, the roar from the clearing was gone, replaced by the muffled, furious buzzing from within the gourd. With lightning speed, Anansi slapped the remaining banana leaf over the opening and plugged it tight with a wad of sticky clay he had prepared. It was done. He held the gourd up to his ear. It vibrated violently in his hands, a container of pure, distilled rage, a miniature buzzing sun. 2 payments procured, 2 impossible tasks completed, but the third had teeth and claws, and a hunger for clever little creatures who wandered alone in the forest. The third was Osibo the leopard. Osibo the leopard, a name spoken in whispers when the sun bled out behind the trees. He was not merely an animal. He was the forest's sharpest edge, the velvet paw that concealed a constellation of claws. He was the ghost in the dappled sunlight, a ripple of muscle and spotted gold. His roar could curdle the sap in the trees, and his eyes held the cold, indifferent fire of a dying star. To hunt Osibo was not to hunt an animal. It was to challenge the very concept of the predator, to declare war on the food chain itself. And Anansi, a creature of silk and shadow, was about to do just that. He knew direct confrontation was suicide. You cannot fight a storm with a single leaf. You cannot reason with an earthquake. So Anansi did what he always did. He watched. For days, he became an 8th leg on a branch, a knot in the bark, an unblinking eye in the canopy. He learned the leopard's paths, the trails worn smooth by an arrogant, unthreatened power. He learned the rhythm of Osibo's hunts, the scent of his passing, the deep rumbling purr of his satisfaction after a kill. He saw not just a beast, but a creature of habit, and more importantly, a creature of immense pride. Pride, Anansi knew, was a rope you could hand to any great man or beast, and they would, sooner or later, tie their own noose. Anansi found the perfect spot, a narrow pass between 2 ancient baobab trees, a path Osibo used every single evening on his way to the watering hole. And here Anansi began to dig, not with the frantic scrabbling of a frightened animal, but with the patient, meticulous precision of a master craftsman. He dug a pit deep and wide, its sides steep and smooth. He worked through the night, his many legs a blur, carrying away the red earth grain by grain, hiding it so no trace remained. When the hole was deep enough to swallow the leopard whole, he began the second phase of his plan. He wove a lattice of strong, springy branches over the top, a false floor that looked solid but would buckle under any real weight. And upon this lattice, he carefully laid a carpet of leaves and dust, matching the forest floor so perfectly that even he, the architect, had to look twice to see his own deception. His trap was set. Now for the bait. And the bait, as always, would be himself. He waited until the late afternoon, when the shadows grew long and the air cooled. He heard Osibo approaching long before he saw him. A faint tremor in the earth, the crack of a twig under a heavy paw. Anansi took a deep breath and began to argue, loudly, with himself. "It can," he shouted to a nearby tree. "No, it cannot," he answered himself back. "I tell you it's possible. Impossible. Utterly impossible." The commotion was just strange enough to be intriguing. Osibo, the leopard, emerged from the brush, his movements a fluid dance of lethal grace. He stopped, his head cocked, golden eyes fixing on the bizarre sight of the little spider yelling at the air. "Anansi." The leopard's voice was a low growl like stones grinding together. "Have you finally lost what little sense you possess? Who are you arguing with?" Anansi spun around, feigning surprise. "Ah, Osibo. Forgive my outburst. I was just settling a debate with myself. A silly thing, really." The leopard was not one for games, but his curiosity was piqued. "A debate about what?" "About binding," Anansi said, his voice full of manufactured frustration. "My wife also, she says I am a fool. She says that when the sky god made all the creatures, he gave some strength and some cunning, but he never gave both. She says a creature tied with vines can never escape, no matter how strong. But I say, what if they are truly strong? Like you, mighty Osibo. Surely, no vine could hold you." Osibo stretched, rolling his powerful shoulders. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Your wife is wise, little spider. A vine is a vine. Once bound, you are caught." "Ah, but see, that's the point." Anansi scurried closer, his voice conspiratorial. "What if we played a game? The binding game. Just to see. I will tie you up with these vines, and if you can break free, I will admit that strength is greater than any trap. If you cannot, then well, let's just see." The leopard looked at Anansi. He looked at the flimsy-looking vines the spider was pointing to. The sheer absurdity of the proposal was insulting. The idea that this spindly creature could ever contain him was laughable. And it was that laughter, that deep, arrogant confidence that sealed his fate. "A game, is it?" Osibo purred, the sound a threat and a promise. "Very well. But let's make it fair. You tie me and then I tie you. We'll see who is better at this binding game." Anansi's heart, if he had one, would have been pounding. This was even better than he'd planned. An excellent idea. A true test. But you must go first, to show me how it is done. This suited Osibo's pride perfectly. He lay down, letting Anansi approach with the vines. The spider, with great ceremony, wrapped a single thin vine loosely around one of the leopard's paws. He tied a simple, clumsy knot. "There. Now break free, O mighty one." With a flick of his wrist, Osibo snapped the vine. He laughed, a deep booming sound that shook the leaves. "Is that the best you can do, spider? My turn." But Anansi was already hopping with excitement. "Wait. I see my mistake. I used the wrong vine. And I didn't tie it properly. Let me try again. Let me show you how I meant to do it. Then you can have your turn, I promise." He gestured for Osibo to lie down again. The leopard, amused and utterly convinced of his own superiority, complied. But this time, Anansi didn't grab the thin, flimsy vines. This time he darted into the undergrowth and returned dragging thick, tough creepers, the kind that were as strong as rope. "Now," Anansi chirped, "we play for real." And he began to work. He wrapped a vine around one leg, then another. He pulled the knots tight, using all 8 of his limbs, bracing himself, weaving the vines together. Osibo watched, a smirk on his face, indulging the spider's little game. "Tighter, little one," he purred. "Don't be afraid." Anansi obliged. He bound Osibo's front legs together, then his back legs. He wrapped the vines around the leopard's thick, muscular body, pulling until the powerful creature was trussed and bundled. He worked quickly, his movements a blur, chattering the whole time about the rules of the game, about technique, about how strong Osibo must be to surely break these vines as well. The leopard, cocooned in his own arrogance, simply lay there, waiting for the game to be over so he could have his turn. Finally, Anansi tied the last knot. There. Now, break free, king of the forest. Show me the power that makes the mountains tremble. Osibo strained. His muscles bunched and coiled like serpents. The vines creaked, but they held. He tried again, letting out a low growl of effort. The creepers cut into his flesh, but they did not snap. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He put his full power into it, a body designed for explosive force now fighting against itself. The vines groaned, stretched, but they were woven too well, knotted too cleverly. They held. The annoyance in Osibo's eyes slowly curdled into confusion, then into the cold, dawning horror of realization. He was trapped. He, Osibo, the uncatchable, the unbeatable, was bound tight by a spider. He roared, a sound of pure, frustrated fury. But it was just noise now. Powerless. It seems my wife was wrong, Anansi said softly, his voice no longer chirpy and foolish, but as cold and sharp as a shard of obsidian. It seems cunning can in fact bind strength. He then attached a long, strong strand of his own silk to the web of vines, and he began to pull. He pulled the bound and helpless leopard, inch by painful inch, across the forest floor, right towards the spot between the two baobab trees. Osibo, helpless, could only snarl and curse as he was dragged over the ground he once ruled. And then, with one final tug, Anansi pulled him onto the perfectly disguised trap. The branches cracked. The leaves gave way. And with a great crash and a final strangled roar of disbelief, Osibo, the leopard, the terror of the jungle, plunged into the darkness of the pit. Anansi peered over the edge. Down below, the great cat lay in a heap, utterly defeated. Not by strength but by a story. Not by a weapon but by a game. Anansi spun a thick web, a ladder into the sky, and presented the end to the sky god. Nyame pulled, and up from the forest came the snarling, vine-wrapped form of Osibo, the third payment. He was delivered. The spirit of the predator caged. 3 tasks down. 3 impossible feats accomplished. Nyame looked at the tiny spider, a new respect dawning in his ancient eyes. He had the hornets. He had the python. He had the leopard. All that Anansi had promised. But the box of stories was not yet won. There was one payment left. And this last payment was not a creature of scale or sting or claw. It wasn't a beast to be trapped or a monster to be tricked with brute cunning. The final price was for something far more elusive. Something made of moonlight and mischief. The final price was Moesha, the forest fairies. And how, Nyame wondered, do you catch a creature that isn't really there at all? How do you trap a whisper? How do you put a chain on a moonbeam? Anansi knew the answer was simple. You don't. You don't chase them and you don't try to hold them. You make them want to be caught. You build a trap not of rope and wood, but of curiosity and pride. Anansi retreated from the edge of the Sky Kingdom, his mind already spinning a new web, one far more intricate than any he had spun before. He descended back to the forest floor, his 8 legs moving with a renewed purpose. He passed the river where the python now slept in a daze, and the clearing where the leopard's roars had been silenced. Those were challenges of the body, of muscle and fang. This was a challenge of the spirit. He sought out a gum tree, one whose bark bled a thick, milky white sap, sticky as honey and stubborn as a grudge. For hours he worked, drawing the latex from the tree, molding it with patient, clever legs. He shaped a small figure no bigger than a human child. He gave it a round head, a simple body, 2 arms and 2 legs. He didn't carve a face. A face invites conversation. Anansi wanted something different. He wanted a void, a blank, silent mystery. He called this creation Acua, the gum baby. When the doll was complete, glistening and tacky in the dappled sunlight, Anansi moved to the second phase of his plan. He found a patch of wild yams, dug them from the rich earth, and built a small, smokeless fire. He roasted the yams until their skins were crisp and their insides were soft and sweet. The aroma that rose from the fire was a lure in itself, a warm, earthy perfume that promised comfort and satisfaction. He mashed the yams into a delicious steaming pulp, placed them in a small wooden bowl, and then very carefully, He set the bowl in the lap of the gum baby. His trap was set. He found the path where the Moesha were known to dance when the moon was high, a path worn smooth by the passage of unseen feet. He placed the gum baby right beside the path, sitting against the trunk of a great silk cotton tree, holding its offering of warm yams. Then Anansi did what he did best. He climbed high into the canopy, spun a small, discreet web, and he waited. He became nothing more than a shadow among shadows, a patient predator of mischief itself. As dusk bled into night, the forest changed. The air grew cool and filled with the chirping of crickets and the low hoot of an owl. And then they came. They didn't walk or run. They seemed to drift in on the evening breeze. At first, they were just flickers in the corner of the eye, giggles like the rustling of dry leaves, whispers that sounded like the wind. The Moesha. They were small, humanoid figures, their forms shimmering as if woven from moonlight and river mist. They danced and played, chasing fireflies, their movements joyful and chaotic. One of them, a fairy seemingly bolder than the rest, darted ahead and stopped dead. Saw the doll. It tilted its head, its large luminous eyes fixed on the silent figure and the steaming bowl of yams. The smell was irresistible. The fairy drifted closer, its feet barely touching the ground. "Hello," it chirped, its voice like tiny bells. "That food smells wonderful. Are you not going to eat it?" The gum baby, of course, remained silent. Its blank, featureless head offered no reply. The Moesha frowned, a flicker of impatience crossing its ethereal face. "It is polite to answer when you are spoken to," it said, a little louder this time. "I said, are you not going to eat? May I have some?" Silence. The doll just sat there, a sticky, silent sentinel holding its treasure. Now the fairy was insulted. Moesha were creatures of impulse and emotion, and their pride was easily wounded. Who was this strange, silent child to ignore it? To hoard such delicious food and offer no greeting, no explanation? "You are very rude," the fairy declared, stamping a tiny, glowing foot. "If you will not give me some, I will take it." The fairy reached out to snatch the bowl of yams. But Anansi had placed the bowl perfectly. To reach it, the fairy had to push the doll's arm aside. The moment its hand touched the gum baby's arm, it stuck fast. The fairy gasped, surprised. It pulled. The doll's arm, coated in the clinging sap, did not let go. It pulled harder, a flicker of panic in its eyes. "Let me go," it cried. The doll did not respond. Frustration boiled into rage. "You think you can hold me? I'll teach you a lesson," the fairy shouted. And with its free hand, it slapped the doll's face. That hand, too, was instantly trapped, stuck firm against the gum baby's cheek. The fairy was now in a true panic. It was bound to this silent, unresponsive thing. The other Moesha had stopped their games and were watching from a distance, their mischievous giggles replaced by hushed, worried whispers. The trapped fairy struggled, thrashing wildly. In its fury, it kicked the doll's chest. Its foot became hopelessly entangled, kicked with the other foot. Now both feet and both hands were caught. It was completely immobilized, spread-eagled against the sticky figure. In a final act of desperate, foolish rage, the fairy lunged forward and headbutted the doll. Its head, its hair, its entire being was now glued to the trap. Could not move, could not escape. It could only wiggle pathetically, a creature of pure spirit and motion, now rendered utterly helpless by a lump of sap and its own wounded pride. That was the moment Anansi chose to descend. He rappelled down from the canopy on a single strand of silk, landing silently beside the captured fairy. The other Moesha shrieked in terror at the sight of the spider god and vanished back into the deep woods, their ghostly forms dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Anansi circled the gum baby, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. The captured fairy stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Well, well," Anansi said, his voice smooth and mocking. "It seems you've made a new friend. A very clingy friend." He tapped one of his legs against the gum baby. "You see, little fairy, you thought it was rude, but its silence was a question. And you answered with your fists and your feet. You trapped yourself. Your own anger was the cage." He didn't need to capture all of them. Nyame had asked for Moesha, the fairies. He had one. Proof that he could outwit even the spirits of the forest. He spun a quick, strong web around the entire effigy, binding the captured fairy and the gum baby into a single awkward bundle. It was a strange prize to carry. A silent doll with a living, terrified, magical creature glued to its front. Hoisting his final prize onto his back, Anansi turned his gaze upward toward the heavens. The hornets were in his gourd, the python was bound in his web, the leopard was tied in the vine. And now he carried the impossible, a fairy caught not with a net, but with a trick of the mind. He had paid the price. All 4 parts. He had gathered the storm, the earth, the fong, and the spirit. Now only one thing remained: to return to Nyame the Sky God, and lay these impossible trophies at his feet. He began the long climb back up the silken thread to the Sky Kingdom, his heart pounding not with exhaustion, but with a fierce, burning anticipation. He was no longer just Anansi, the spinner of tales. He was about to become the keeper of all tales. The question was, would the Sky God truly give up his most prized possession? Or was the final trick, the greatest trick of all, yet to be played? Anansi, now burdened with the impossible, began his ascent. He didn't just climb his silken thread back to the heavens, he hauled his victories with him. First, the leopard, magically bound and still bewildered, slung over his back. Then the gourd, buzzing with the furious, trapped hornets, a miniature galaxy of contained rage. And finally, the great python Onini, tied to the bamboo pole, a shimmering serpentine testament to the power of a well-told lie. Each step up that shimmering thread was a monumental effort. He was a tiny creature, a speck of black against the endless blue, carrying the weight of a god's challenge. The world below grew smaller, the other animals watching in stunned silence. They had all laughed. They had all mocked him. Now they watched as the fool, the braggart, the spinner of nonsense, climbed towards the heavens with the very symbols of impossibility in his grasp. He arrived at the court of Nyame not with a crash, but with a quiet, deliberate presence. The air in the Sky Kingdom, usually filled with the music of the stars and the laughter of celestial beings, fell silent. All eyes turned to the small spider, dragging his monumental prizes before the golden stool of the Sky God. He laid them down one by one. The leopard, Maboro the hornet swarm, and Onini the python. They were not dead. That was crucial. He had not destroyed them. He had outthought them. He had conquered their essence, not just their bodies. Nyame leaned forward on his throne, his face unreadable, like a storm cloud holding both lightning and rain. His divine court gasped. These were not just creatures, they were forces of nature. The raw, untamable power of the forest, the collective fury of the swarm, the silent, constricting death of the river. And a spider, a creature you could crush without a thought, had brought them all to heel. Anansi didn't speak. He simply stood there, all 8 legs planted firmly, his many eyes fixed on the Sky God. The silence stretched, becoming heavier than the python, more menacing than the hornets. This was the true test. Had he done enough? Was this all just a cosmic joke? A bit of divine entertainment at his expense? Finally Nyame spoke, his voice not a thunderclap, but a low rumble that vibrated through Anansi's very being. Anansi, he said, the name echoing in the vast hall. You have done what no god, no spirit, no man could do. You have brought me the untamable. He gestured to the captives. You did not use strength, for you have none. You did not use speed, for the leopard is faster. You did not use a legion, for the hornets are a legion unto themselves. Nyame rose from his throne, a towering figure of cosmic power, and walked down to where Anansi stood. He looked down not with contempt, but with a new startling expression, respect. You used your mind. You used your wit. You used the stories you wished to own. The Sky God turned to his court, his voice now booming with authority. For too long, I have kept the stories locked away. I believed them to be my treasure alone. But wisdom that is not shared is not wisdom. It is vanity. A story that is not told is not a story. It is a secret, and secrets breed shadows. He looked back at Anansi. This small creature has shown me that the greatest power is not in the hoarding of knowledge, but in the cleverness of its application. He has proven himself worthy. Nyame clapped his hands, and 2 spirits brought forth a magnificent carved wooden chest. It was not large, but it seemed to contain the weight of the universe. It glowed with a soft, internal light, and from it emanated the faint sound of a million whispers, a billion heartbeats, the rustle of every leaf on every tree, the crash of every wave on every shore. This was the Moshe, the box of stories. It contained every tale ever told, and every tale that was yet to be. It held the epic of the first sunrise, the tragedy of the first tear, the comedy of the first misunderstanding. It held the knowledge of kings and the wisdom of farmers. It was the collective memory of the world. Anansi, Nyame declared, his voice resonating with cosmic finality. I give you this chest. I give you the stories, but they will no longer be called Nyame's stories. The sky god placed a hand, larger than Anansi's entire body, gently over the spider. From this day forward and for all time to come, they shall be known by a new name. They will be called Anansi Stories. Anansi. The name hung in the air, powerful and new. Anansi. The court of the sky god erupted in cheers. The impossible had been achieved. The cosmic order had been shifted not by a great war or a celestial cataclysm, but by the wit of a single determined spider. Anansi, trembling with the magnitude of his victory, took possession of the chest. It was heavy, not with physical weight, but with the burden of responsibility. He was no longer just a trickster looking for an easy meal. He was now the vessel for all the world's knowledge, the custodian of its memories and dreams. His descent from the heavens was a spectacle. He didn't just climb down his thread. He was lowered in a triumphant procession, the box of stories held aloft. The animals on the ground watched, their mockery turned to utter astonishment and awe. The very air seemed to change as he brought the stories down from the sky and returned them to the earth, to the forests, to the rivers, and to the people. He had done more than trick a few powerful creatures. He had, in essence, stolen fire from the gods, not the fire that cooks food, but the fire that illuminates the mind. He opened the box, and the stories flew out. They swirled and danced, taking the form of birds and butterflies, whispering winds and flowing rivers. They settled into the minds of everyone, no longer the exclusive property of a distant god, but a common treasure, accessible to all. The story of why the moon and sun live in the sky, the tale of how the leopard got its spots, the reason why cats chase mice. Every riddle, every proverb, every cautionary tale, every heroic epic, they all now belonged to the world, and they all carried Anansi's name. This single act fundamentally rewired the world of the Ashanti and so many other cultures. It established Anansi not just as a folk hero, but as a culture bringer, a pivotal figure on par with Prometheus. He was the great equalizer. Through his actions, the stories and the wisdom, strategy, and understanding they contained became a tool for everyone, especially the powerless. A story could be a map, a weapon, a shield, or a key. It could teach you how to endure hardship, how to outsmart a tyrant, how to understand your neighbor, how to laugh in the face of despair. Anansi didn't just bring stories, he brought the power of narrative itself down to earth. And so the world was filled with Anansism. Children would gather around the fire at night, their eyes wide, and ask to hear a story of Anansi. And the elders would begin, Kwaku Anansi, and the magic would start all over again. But this, of course, was only the beginning. Possessing all the stories in the world is one thing. What you do with them, that is an entirely different matter. Anansi was now the wisest and most knowledgeable creature in the world. But wisdom and cunning are a dangerous cocktail. He had the power to enlighten and to entertain, but also to deceive and to manipulate on a scale never before imagined. He had won the ultimate prize, but in doing so, he had placed the ultimate temptation in his own 8 hands. The question was no longer if he could achieve the impossible, but what he would build or break with his newfound power. And for a time he chose to build nothing at all. He chose only to possess. The Moesha, the great wooden box humming with the stories of the world, became his private treasure. He would take it to the highest branches of the silk cotton tree, far from the prying eyes of the other animals, far from the questions of his own family. There he would sit, legs crossed, and simply hold it. He would run his hands over the carved wood, feeling the faint vibrations of 1,000 narratives trapped within. He felt the power of it, a low thrum that resonated deep in his chest. This was more than the sky god's favor. It was the sky god's very essence, captured and held. In the beginning it was intoxicating. He was the sole keeper of every legend, every history, every joke, and every sorrow. When the other animals gathered, their conversations felt thin, empty. They would speak of the day's hunt or the coming rains, but there were no grand tales to illustrate a point, no fables to teach a lesson. A strange quiet had fallen over the forest, The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but hollow. The world had lost its memory, and only Anansi knew the words to bring it back. He enjoyed this. He felt their dependence, their unknowing need for what he held. He was no longer just a clever spider. He was the librarian of existence. But possession without an audience is a lonely throne. His wife, the ever-wise Oso, saw the change in him. He grew distant, his eyes holding a secret glee that he shared with no one. His children would ask for a story at night, and Anansi would just smile a smug, empty smile and shake his head. "The stories are sleeping," he would say, a lie that tasted like honey and poison on his tongue. He was becoming a dragon, hoarding a treasure that had no value locked away in the dark. The pressure began to build, not from the outside world but from within. The stories themselves seemed to push against the confines of the box. They wanted to be told. They yearned for breath, for an audience, for the life that only comes from being shared. Anansi could feel them stirring, a restless energy that made the box feel warm to the touch. The temptation to keep them, to be the only one who knew, was warring with a deeper, more ancient truth. A story isn't a story until it is told. This conflict reminded him of another time. A time when he had tried to hoard something even more fundamental than stories. He had tried to hoard wisdom itself. It was an ambition born of the same magnificent ego. He had looked around at the world and thought, why should wisdom be scattered? Why should the foolish elephant and the simple diker possess even a tiny piece of it? It should all belong to me. And so, Anansi had set out on a great quest. He took a large clay pot, and with his unparalleled cunning, he began to gather all the wisdom in the world. He tricked the snake out of its knowledge of the forest floor. He flattered the eagle into giving up its secrets of the wind. He collected the common sense of the farmer, the patience of the river, the deep, slow knowledge of the mountains. He bottled it all, every last drop, into his clay pot until it was full to the brim. The world, he was sure, was now a little dumber, and he was infinitely smarter. His plan was simple. He would hide the pot at the very top of the tallest, thorniest tree, where no one else could ever reach it. He would be the sole proprietor of wisdom. He arrived at the base of the great tree, the heavy pot secured with vines. He decided the most logical way to climb was to tie the pot to his front, right against his belly. Seemed sensible. But as he began to climb, the pot was a clumsy, awkward bulge. It banged against the trunk, knocking him off balance. His legs would find a hold, but the pot would swing and pull him away. He slid down, covered in scratches, his frustration mounting. He tried again and again, the pot an impossible obstacle between him and the trunk. He was so focused on the prize, so blinded by the wisdom he already possessed, that he couldn't see the simple, obvious flaw in his method. All the while, his youngest son, Takuma, had been watching from the shade of a nearby bush. He was a small, quiet child, often overlooked. He watched his father struggle, sweat, and curse. Finally, in a small, clear voice, Takuma called out, "Father, if you tied the pot to your back, your arms and legs would be free to climb the tree." Anansi froze. The world stopped. The sheer, infuriating, perfect logic of the statement hit him like a physical blow. Here he was, with all the wisdom in the world strapped to his chest, and he had been outsmarted by the simple observation of a small child. The wisdom he had so carefully collected was useless, because in his greed to possess it, he had forgotten how to use it. A single person could not contain all wisdom, because wisdom itself requires perspective, the very thing he had tried to eliminate. In a singular, magnificent fit of rage and shame, Anansi untied the pot. He held it aloft, this vessel of his ultimate ambition and his ultimate failure, and with a great cry, he hurled it down at the base of the tree. The clay pot shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the wisdom, freed from its prison, flew out. A great wind picked it up and scattered it like pollen to the four corners of the world. It fell in the villages and in the lonely savannas. It settled in the minds of chiefs and of children. It found its way into the hands of the potter and the heart of the mother. And that, the old story says, is why wisdom is not owned by any one person. It is a little piece of it everywhere for everyone to find. Now, holding the moesha, the box of all stories, Anansi felt the ghost of that same shame. He was making the exact same mistake. He was tying the pot to his belly all over again. The stories weren't a treasure to be hoarded. They were a wisdom to be shared. They were useless in the box. Their magic only worked when it was released. He looked at the box, the beautiful humming prison he had created for them. He saw his own reflection in the polished wood. A small creature, puffed up with a stolen silent power. He saw the face of a fool on a tree. In that moment, something inside him broke. Or perhaps it was built. With a sudden decisive movement, he didn't throw the box. That would be too simple, too much like his past failure. Anansi's actions, even his corrections, had to have style. He scurried down the tree, carrying the box with a new purpose. He walked to the center of the village, where everyone was gathered for the evening meal. He placed the moesha on the ground, and without a single word of explanation, he lifted the heavy lid. There was no great wind, no explosion of light. There was only a sound, a whisper at first, then a rush of voices, a chorus of laughter and weeping, of war cries and lullabies. The stories poured out. They flowed from the box like a river of spirit and memory, invisible but unstoppable. They swirled through the village, curling like smoke into the ears of everyone present. They soared over the grasslands and into the dense forests. They followed the rivers to the sea, and they traveled on the trade winds to lands no one had even named yet. Anansi had done it. He had released them. The stories were now free, belonging to everyone and no one. His name would forever be attached to them. They would always be Anansi-sem, Anansi stories. He had earned that eternal fame, but he had lost his exclusive prize. He was no longer the keeper of the stories. He was simply the one who had let them go. And as he stood there, watching the world absorb his gift, a new, far more complicated chapter of his existence was about to begin. This new reality settled upon Anansi like a fine dust, covering everything he thought he knew about himself. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, and in doing so, had authored his own obsolescence. The world was now a library, and every man, woman, and child was a librarian, free to check out, read, and even rewrite the tales he had bled for. His name was on the spine of every book, but he no longer owned the copyright. This was an intolerable state of affairs for a creature whose very essence was woven from threads of ego and control. If he could no longer be the sole gatekeeper of the stories, he would have to become their most compelling subject. He would not just be in the stories, he would be the story. And so began Anansi's grand campaign of narrative dominance. He became a whirlwind of mischief and cunning, a constant, buzzing source of chaos and cleverness that the world simply could not ignore. He decided that if people were going to tell tales, the most interesting tales would be about him. He tricked the proud leopard out of his spotted coat, convincing him it was a hand-me-down he should be ashamed of. He convinced the vain and powerful python that the only way to truly know his magnificent length was to lie down flat and be measured, with a vine that Anansi then used to tie him to a tree. Each act was more audacious than the last, a calculated performance designed to be retold around every fire, in every village. He wasn't just catching prey, he was creating legends. But his ambition often outstripped his wisdom. In one of his most infamous schemes, Anansi became obsessed not just with stories, but with the very source of all knowledge, wisdom itself. He saw how the sky god Nyame used wisdom to create order, and he saw how humans used it to build, to farm, to thrive. Anansi, in his greed, saw wisdom not as a tool for creation, but as the ultimate commodity. He wanted it all. So he set out on a quest, a silent, creeping pilgrimage, to gather every scrap of wisdom in the world. He collected it from the old woman who knew which roots healed sickness, from the farmer who knew the language of the clouds, from the child who understood the simple joy of a game. He stole it, bartered for it, and tricked it out of everyone he met, placing each piece into a large clay pot. Soon the pot was full, brimming with all the world's knowledge. Anansi, clutching his prize, felt a surge of power he had never known before. He would be the wisest of all. No one would ever outsmart him again. He decided to hide the pot at the top of the tallest, thorniest silk cotton tree, where no one else could ever reach it. But there was a problem. The pot was large and round, and Anansi, with his 8 spindly legs, couldn't figure out how to climb the tree while also holding it. He tried to strap it to his chest, but it was too awkward, bumping against his knees and the tree trunk, making it impossible to get a grip. He struggled, he slipped, he cursed, growing more and more frustrated. Watching from the base of the tree was his own young son, Takuma. After observing his father's ridiculous struggle for some time, the boy finally spoke up. his voice small but clear. "Father," he said, "if you tied the pot to your back instead of your front, it would not get in your way and you could climb easily." The silence that followed was heavy with humiliation. Anansi froze. The solution was so simple, so obvious. He, who held all the wisdom in the world in a pot, had been outsmarted by the simple, practical logic of his own child. The sheer, infuriating irony of it all overwhelmed him. In a flash of pure rage and shame, Anansi lifted the heavy clay pot and smashed it against the tree. The pot shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the wisdom, all the world's knowledge he had so greedily collected, was released. A great wind swept through the forest, carrying the glittering fragments of insight and understanding to every corner of the earth. It fell like rain upon the villages and cities, the mountains and the plains, so that a little bit of wisdom found its way into the mind of every person. Anansi, in his selfish attempt to hoard all knowledge, had once again become the accidental benefactor of humanity. He had tried to become a god of wisdom, but instead became a lesson in humility. This duality, the selfish trickster whose actions inadvertently benefit the community, became his defining characteristic. But the stories and Anansi himself were not destined to stay in West Africa. A great and terrible change was coming. Ships arrived on the coasts, ships larger than any canoe, and with them came men who did not respect the gods, the spirits, or the people. The age of the transatlantic slave trade began, a brutal shattering that ripped millions of Africans from their homes, their families, and their histories. They were chained, packed into the bellies of ships, and carried across an ocean to a new world of unimaginable cruelty. They were stripped of their possessions, their names, their languages. But there was one thing that could not be so easily taken: their stories. In the suffocating darkness of the slave ships, in the sweltering cane fields of the Caribbean, in the oppressive plantations of the American South, the people held on to Anansi. He traveled with them, a stowaway in their minds, a whisper of home in a foreign land. And in this new world he transformed. He had to. The stakes were no longer about winning a feast or outsmarting a lion. The stakes were now life and death. Survival. Anansi, the small, clever spider, became the ultimate symbol of resistance. He was the powerless outwitting the powerful. His stories became coded manuals for survival. When Anansi tricked a tiger 100 times his size, it was a story about how a slave could outthink his brutal overseer. When Anansi used his wits to escape a trap, it was a lesson in how to navigate a system designed to crush you. His name changed, adapting to new tongues. In Jamaica, he was Anansi. In the Gullah Geechee communities of the Carolinas, he became Aunt Nancy, a name that softened his edges but not his cunning. The stories were told in secret, in hushed tones, a vital thread connecting a people to their severed past and giving them the mental tools to endure their horrific present. Anansi was no longer just a folk hero. He was a psychological weapon. He was proof that size and strength were not the only forms of power. Wit, intelligence, and a refusal to be broken were powers unto themselves. He taught that even in the face of absolute authority, there were cracks, loopholes, and weaknesses that a clever mind could exploit. He was hope spun from a silk thread of pure defiance. He had set the stories free long ago, watching them scatter on the wind. He could never have imagined how far that wind would carry them, or the vital purpose they would come to serve. He had once sought to own all the stories, then to be the star of them. But now, in the crucible of human suffering and resilience, he was becoming something far more profound. He had become more than a god, more than a spider. He was an idea, a strategy for survival. And as the world modernized, as empires rose and fell, the question wasn't whether Anansi would survive, but what form he would take next. That new form would be forged in the belly of the beast, in the dark, suffocating holds of slave ships crossing the Atlantic. This journey, the Middle Passage, was an apocalypse. It was designed to strip people of everything: their families, their homes, their names, their humanity. But there was one thing it could not take: the stories whispered in the dark. And in those whispers, Anansi stowed away. He was no longer a god of the sky or a keeper of tales for a village. He was a secret, a contraband hope. On the brutal plantations of the Caribbean and the Americas, the powerful were no longer leopards or hornets. They were overseers, masters, systems of oppression built on violence. And Anansi, the small spider who could outwit them all, became more important than ever. His tales were no longer just for entertainment or moral lessons. They were blueprints for survival. They were a reminder that even when your body is in chains, your mind can be free. A reminder that cleverness is a weapon that cannot be confiscated. The stories were a release valve, a form of psychological resistance. In a world of absolute powerlessness, telling a story about a tiny spider tricking a massive tiger was an act of rebellion. It was a way of saying, "You may control our bodies, but you do not control our spirit. You do not own our wit." Anansi taught that you could play the fool to fool the fool. You could use the master's own greed and arrogance against him. You could find a way to win even when the rules were rigged. And as the stories were passed down from one generation to the next, born into bondage, Anansi began to change. He adapted as he always does. In Jamaica and across the Caribbean, he became Anansi. His tales a cornerstone of the culture. In the American South, he shed his spider skin, but his spirit was reborn. It entered the body of a rabbit. A rabbit. Think about it. A small, seemingly defenseless creature, living in a world full of predators like fox and bear, who constantly tries to eat him. And how does he survive? Not with strength, but with his wits, his trickery, his ability to talk his way out of anything. The story of Rabbit and the Tar Baby is pure, unadulterated Anansi. The themes, the structure, the lesson. It's the spider's soul in a rabbit's fur. The archetype had crossed an ocean and found a new home. A new face, but its heart was the same. This was Anansi's greatest trick. He embedded himself so deeply into the culture of the diaspora that he became an inseparable part of it. He was a link back to the Africa that had been stolen, a thread of cultural memory that could not be broken. He was proof that you can burn the libraries but you can't kill the stories. Centuries passed. Slavery was abolished, but the struggle for freedom and equality was far from over. And Anansi continued to evolve. He crept out of the folktales and into literature, into music, into the very fabric of modern storytelling. He found his way into the novels of authors who understood his power, who saw the trickster as a vital force in a world still full of imbalance and injustice. Perhaps his most famous modern incarnation is in Neil Gaiman's masterpiece, American Gods. Here he is Mr. Nancy, no longer a spider but a man. A sharply dressed, outrageously charismatic, and dangerously sharp-tongued old god, still angry, still fighting for his people. Gaiman understood that Anansi wouldn't just fade away. He'd put on a tailored suit, light a cigarette, and start a revolution. This Mr. Nancy is the god of stories, yes, but he's also the god of rebellion. He uses his words to expose hypocrisy, to tear down comfortable lies, and to rally the forgotten. He is the perfect evolution of Anansi for the 21st century. A trickster who understands that the new battlefields are not jungles, but the narratives we tell ourselves. The war is for hearts and minds, and the best weapon is a well-told story. So why? Why has this one character, this spider god from West Africa, endured for so long across so many cultures through so much trauma? The answer is as complex and multifaceted as Anansi himself. First, he represents the eternal hope of the underdog. In a world that so often feels unfair, where power seems consolidated in the hands of the few, Anansi is a promise. He is the promise that intelligence can beat brute force, that creativity can overcome capital, that a clever plan can topple an empire. He gives us permission to believe that we, the small, can win. Second, he is fundamentally deeply human. Anansi is no shining paragon of virtue. He is greedy. He is lazy. He is arrogant. He is a cheat and a liar. And that's why we love him. He is not an aspirational hero we can never become. He is a reflection of the flawed, complex, often contradictory parts of ourselves. He embodies our own selfish desires, our own moments of weakness, and our own clever triumphs. He doesn't ask us to be perfect. He just asks us to be smart. But most importantly, Anansi is the ultimate testament to the power of stories themselves. His entire existence is a story about stories. He is the god who owned all the stories, who understood their value before anyone else. His greatest trick was not on the python or the leopard. It was on time itself. He wove his own narrative so skillfully that it became immortal. He ensured his own survival by becoming the very idea of survival through narrative. He teaches us that stories are not just entertainment. They are technology. They are the software we use to understand the world. They are the tools we use to build communities, to pass on wisdom, to fight oppression, and to imagine a better future. A story can be a map, a weapon, a shield, or a key, and the person who controls the stories controls everything. From an ancient god receiving tales from the Sky King, to a spider outsmarting animals in the forest, to a whispered hope in the belly of a slave ship, to a rabbit in a briar patch, to an old man in a tailored suit starting a war of gods. It has all been Anansi. He is the thread that connects it all. The web he weaves is not just of silk. It is a web of history, of resilience, of rebellion, and of hope. It stretches from the dawn of humanity in Africa to the digital networks that now span the globe. And every time you root for the underdog, every time you admire a clever solution to an impossible problem, every time you recognize that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword, you are feeling the faint vibration of Anansi's web. He is more than a myth. He is a strategy, a worldview, an enduring symbol of the unconquerable spirit that refuses to be broken, that will always find a way to rewrite the story in its own favor. And his tale is a timeless, crucial reminder. It doesn't matter how big your enemy is. What matters is how clever you are. And that the best stories, the ones that truly last forever, belong to those who are smart enough to go out and take them.